Hey, what's your name?
Andy
And where are you from?
from Destin, Florida.
What's your name?
Robert Rice,
Where are you from?
Phoenix, Arizona.
Hello. What's your
Hi,
name? What's your name?
I am Deborah Lynn.
And where are you from?
I am from. That's a hard question. I am from Shalimar, Florida.
Shalimar, Florida. Thank you.
What's your name? Brian Hay. Hey, Brian. Where are you from?
We're Long Beach.
Long Beach. Recently, during a time of consecration, I was on day 9, and I was consuming the Gospel of John. I would listen to it several times a day in audio form. By the way, go to Bandcamp and check out David Brown's audio Bible series. He's playing the background music that you're hearing right now. I listened to his rendition of the Gospel of John. I listened to it on The Message on Bible Gateway. I watched the movie, The Gospel of John. The Visual Bible came out in 2003, same year as The Passion of the Christ. So it got eclipsed. It's well worth you going back and taking a watch, though. It's on Amazon Prime if you have that. You know, when you listen to a book the whole way through, you catch things that you don't when you just read it piecemeal. And this time, when I was listening to it about the third or fourth time, there's some verses that really jumped out at me. If you've got your own Bible, you can follow along. The Gospel of John, starting in chapter 1, verse 14. It says, "The Word became flesh and took up residence among us. We observed His glory, the glory as the one and only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth." Notice He came from the Father. John 1:45. "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and so did the prophets, Jesus the son of Joseph from Nazareth." And then in John 3:2 it says, "This man came to him at night and said, 'Rabbi, we know that you have come from God as a teacher, for no one can perform these signs you do unless God were with him.'" And then in John 3:8, further on in that conversation, "The wind blows where it pleases, and you hear its sound, but you don't know where it comes from or where it's going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit." John 3:13, "No one has ascended into heaven except the one who descended from heaven, the Son of Man." Are you catching the trend here? John 3:31, he goes on, "The one who comes from above is above all. The one who is from the earth is earthly and speaks in earthly terms. The one who comes from heaven is above all." John 6:38, "I have come down from heaven, not to do my will, but the will of him who sent me." In John 6:42, they were saying, "Isn't this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he now say, 'I have come down from heaven'?" And in John 7:27, "But we know where this man is from." When the Messiah comes, nobody will know where he is from. John 7:26, "He was teaching in the temple complex. Jesus cried out, 'You know me, and you know where I am from. Yet I have not come on my own, but the one who sent me is true. You don't know him.'" In John 7:41, others said, "This is the Messiah." But some said, "Surely the Messiah doesn't come from Galilee, does he?" And then in John 7:42, doesn't the scripture say that the Messiah comes from David's offspring and from the town of Bethlehem, where David once lived? John 7:52, "You aren't from Galilee too, are you?" They replied. "Investigate, and you will see that no prophet arises from Galilee." In John 8:14, "Even if I testify about myself," Jesus replied, "my testimony is valid, because I know where I came from and where I'm going. But you don't know where I come from or where I'm going." John 8:47, "The one who is from God listens to God's words. This is why you don't listen, because you are not from God." Wow. John 9:29, "We know that God has spoken to Moses, but this man, we don't know where he's from." John 16:27, "For the Father himself loves you, because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God." John 16:28, "I came from the Father and have come into the world. Again I am leaving the world and going to the Father." And lastly, John 19:9, "He went back into the headquarters and asked Jesus, 'Where are you from?' But Jesus did not give him an answer." You know, so much of our identity is set by where you're from. We know how immediately to size someone up based on where they're from. We start conversations with, "Where are you from?" If they say England we're going to think a certain thing about them. If they say from Africa, we're going to think something very different. And if they say from Alabama, we're going to think something quite different. You know, we expect so much of ourselves by where we're from, our self-identity. I've struggled with the question, honestly, where are you from? When people ask Dawn, she tells them she's from California. And I always correct her because I consider her from Alabama, you know. She was born in California and her mom and dad and extended family all lived there. But she was raised from the time she was 7 years old in Alabama. So where is she from? My dad was in the Air Force. He and my mom were both from Florida originally, born in Central and South Florida. And we would visit both sets of grandparents every 2 or 3 years in between moves. But except for 1 year at the age of 1, I never lived in Florida growing up. So I was born in Mississippi. Shortly after, moved to Germany and also grew up in Arizona and Texas and Belgium. So how did I answer where you're from originally? I would answer, I'm an Air Force brat. I don't have a home. It's a weird way to start a conversation, but eventually Texas pride grew on me, and since 6 of my most formative years were spent there in Texas, I started saying San Antonio. But after reading this book of John over and over again, or listening to it and watching it, I was amazed, found it striking how much emphasis was placed on where's Jesus from. Was Jesus from Galilee or Nazareth or Bethlehem? It seems obvious that the ones that actually knew the scriptures, that they knew that the Messiah would come from the seed of David. They knew he would need to come from Bethlehem. So why didn't Jesus ever answer the question and validate that he was from Bethlehem? You know, I think it was because Jesus never identified himself as being from Bethlehem. That would have been too limiting. And in fact, he does answer the question, and it's always that he's from above, from heaven, from the Father. And that sets his identity. So notice, Jesus never uses apologetics and takes them through the scriptures and how he fulfilled the prophecy and actually was born in Bethlehem, because that was an inferior identity. His identity was 100% all the time. He maintained that he was from heaven. He was on a mission from God. He was unwilling to identify with any stigma of being from an earthly place, you know, whether Bethlehem or Nazareth or Galilee, good or bad. These are all inferior identities. And they were inferior to the call of God on his life. So I ask you again, where are you from? Are you willing to accept an inferior identity based upon your earthly origin? Or do you truly accept, do you believe, and are you willing to shift your paradigm to realize daily that you're now born from above, born again, born with heavenly origins, heavenly identity, heavenly calling, and heavenly fellowship of family members? Let me read you this other scripture, Hebrews 2:11. Since the one who saves and those who are saved have a common origin, Jesus doesn't hesitate to treat them as family. Jesus declares that our origins are the same as his, not Alabama or Mississippi. Are we willing to believe it? Are we willing to declare it? Or will we continue in our old habits of identity? Recently, this came to my attention when I was at a conference in Orlando. One of the guest speakers was Brother Young, the Heavenly Man. And when I saw his books in the hallway with that title, honestly, at first I thought, what? Who does he think he is? It seemed arrogant, but it isn't. You know, often the spiritual revelation that's given to us will seem arrogant to those that don't get it. No, Brother Young knows his identity and is settled in it. Will you allow God to settle it in you today? I plan to. I had the opportunity recently to respond that way. I was in a group and they were going around the room introducing themselves, you know, their name and where you're from. And when it got to me, I said, I am Lee from heaven. It sounded weird. They all laughed. It's going to take some time to get used to it and to believe what I'm saying. But often we need to hear ourselves declare, to get it down into our heart. I'm going to continue to declare it over my life. I am from heaven. I want to speak to you from heaven. I want to pray from heaven. I want to relate from heaven. I just wanted to share this tidbit on where are you from. I am Newt from OK Island.